Hey guys, Justus here with Filmmakers.com, the largest online film academy in the world, and today we're going to be showing you exactly what you need to know when purchasing a new camera. Because we get the same question every single day. What camera should I buy? Should I go with Canon or Panasonic? What about Blackmagic versus Sony? What about this new camera that just came out? And yes, right now we do have a list of cameras that we would recommend to buy, but that list will change every single month. And then the month after that, and the month after that, because there are new cameras coming out so fast we cannot keep up with them. In our full course, we have a few videos on what camera to buy, and we always have to keep updating it because new cameras are always replacing the old ones. So instead of just making a video on what camera you should buy right now, we wanted to give you guys 10 things to look for in a camera so that no matter when you watch this, whether it's the day we release it or in 2030, you will know exactly what you need to look for whenever it is time to purchase a camera. But a small disclaimer though, many people want to talk about the color depth of this camera or 8-bit versus 10-bit versus low light performance and all that kind of technical stuff. And while all of that is important, if you're starting out and you're not an expert, that stuff won't mean anything to you, and to be honest, you probably won't even care. So this is not a video for someone upgrading from a $4,000 camera to an $8,000 camera. This video is for all of you who aren't quite sure what you need to be looking for in maybe your first camera, your second camera, or maybe even upgrading from your smartphone. If that is you, then stick around and we will show you exactly what you need to be looking for whenever you purchase your camera. But if you are buying your first camera or maybe even upgrading to a better camera, the most important thing is how to use it. A professional with a cheap camera will always have more cinematic images than a beginner with a really expensive camera, because it's all about education. And if you'd like to learn more about taking the gear you have and creating cinematic images, inside our full course at tomorrowsfilmmakers.com, we have over 1,000 training videos and over 100 hours of content on every single aspect of filmmaking taught by leading professionals in the film industry. Want to learn weddings? Why not learn from someone who makes 6 figures a year shooting weddings? Or what about real estate? Learn from a full-time real estate videographer. Directing, acting, cinematography, music videos, short films, product videos, drones, composing, mobile filmmaking. Learn the best from the best. With over 10,000 students in over 50 countries, our award-winning film course is your one stop to learn all the skills that you need to succeed. And the best part is right now we are running an insane deal of only $97. A lifetime membership to our award-winning $800 film course is only $97. So if you want to take advantage of this crazy deal, you can check out our website in the link below and head on over to tomorrowsfilmmakers.com to learn more. So you have a budget for a new camera, or maybe you just have a certain camera in mind. So take this 10-part checklist and see how many boxes your camera checks. And of course, some of them might be obvious, but you still need to know which boxes are checked and which are not. Starting with number 1, and that is interchangeable lenses. Now, this might not seem like a big deal to some of you, or it might seem really basic, but you wouldn't believe the amount of filmmakers that don't pay attention to this. This basically means that the camera has the ability to change lenses. And I make a big deal about this because there are some cameras out there that aren't bad cameras necessarily, like they shoot good quality and some even shoot in 4K, but they have built-in lenses that are stuck on there forever. Something like the Panasonic LX100 Mark II or even the new Panasonic Lumix FZ2500. I have many people send me cameras like this and asking if it's good because it shoots 4K and it's almost $1,000. And yes, it might shoot in okay quality, but having a built-in lens that you have to zoom in and out with is really frustrating and something you are never able to upgrade. Compare that to the Panasonic GH4, which used is around the same price as the LX100. It's much better because you have the ability to change lenses. So if the camera you are looking at has one solid lens that is unable to be removed, in my opinion, it is a deal breaker. Same way with handy cams and other cameras that just have a zoom in and out button, and it is worthless. Find a camera that has the ability to remove lenses. Number 2 is manual controls. In the filmmaking world today, you won't have to deal with this nearly as much as you used to because almost all cameras have the ability to have manual controls that allow you to take full control over your camera. But there are still some older cameras that don't have any manual controls, or if they do, they're very basic and pretty much just have an exposure meter that you can change up or down. So when you're buying a camera, just make sure that it has manual controls. Some extremely cheap cameras don't really have this, but without manual controls, you are pretty much dead in the water. Number 3 is frame rates. Now this used to not be quite as big of a deal, but in today's world, it is huge. The more options your camera has when it comes to frames per second, the better it's going to be. If your camera can only shoot 24 or 30 frames per second, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that you won't be able to shoot in slow motion ever, which, depending on what you're shooting, is a necessity. If you shoot real estate videos, weddings, commercials, there are of course projects that don't require it, but if your camera can't shoot in 60 frames per second, you are shooting yourself in the foot. So 60 frames per second is the standard for slow motion, and some cameras have many different frame rate options like 240 frames per second, 120, 60, 24, and so on. And some cameras you might have to search this a little bit because they might only be able to shoot 4K in 24 frames per second, but only 60 frames per second in 1080p. So if you're going from something with 24 frames to slow motion, you're gonna downgrade from 4K to 1080p. One of my first DSLRs was a Canon 7D, and it could shoot 24 frames per second at 1080p, but could only shoot in 720p at 60 frames per second. So if I ever shot a wedding in mostly slow motion, it would be in 720p. So that's something to be aware of. So if you're wanting slow motion, or at least want the ability to do that, you'll want to find a camera that can shoot in 60 frames per second or more. For example, one of the main cameras that I recommend for everyone starting out to get is the Canon Rebel T2i. It's a fantastic little camera, and the best part is you can find it on eBay for about 150 bucks. It's a great camera to learn with, but the Canon SL2, which is a few $100s more, blows it out of the water by being able to shoot at 1080p in 60 frames per second. Even though they both shoot in 1080p at 24 frames per second, one of them checks that box and would be the preferred camera. Number 4 is, of course, resolution. Should I get 4K? This camera just came out in 6K, but the Red Monstro has 8K, but the new Blackmagic Ursa can shoot in 12K, which is absolutely ridiculous. I personally used a 1080p camera for years and ran a very successful production company at 1080p. But now with everything coming out in 4K, everyone wants it inside of their camera. I mean, even our cell phones shoot in 4K. Now, many people try to say that 4K isn't necessary because the screens that we watch on isn't 4K and we're not getting the true resolution and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not gonna say whether you need it or not, but it does help significantly whenever you're filming. Not only does it allow you to shoot in a larger file with more detail, but you're then able to punch into your image without losing any quality at all. And to be honest, most of the work I did was shot in 4K, but then was sent to the client in a 1080p file. Because most of my clients didn't need a 4K file, they just needed a really high quality footage to use for their social media on their website. In the end, if 4K is available, get it without question. But if you can only afford something that shoots in 1080p, it doesn't mean that the quality will be much worse than someone with a 4K camera. It's not about the resolution, but about the skills behind the camera. And if you want to learn more about how to get better skills with the camera that you have, click the link below to learn more about that. Next is build quality / features, and is exactly what it sounds like. What kind of build does this camera have? And you might think that they're all very similar, but they're actually not. The T2i has a very weak build, and it's really light and made mostly out of plastic. The 1DX Mark II and Mark III, on the other hand, is a very solid, rugged camera that can probably withstand a nuclear disaster. I remember when the Canon 7D came out, Digital Rev did a video about how durable it was. They hit it with a car, threw it down a flight of stairs, submerged it in water, shot it with an airsoft gun, lit it on fire, and it still worked and took pictures. And that is called durable. So what are you gonna be using your camera for? Are you wanting to do a bunch of travel filmmaking where you're traveling around everywhere and it's more likely to get dropped? Or are you gonna be just in a studio where it's always gonna be on a tripod and the build quality doesn't matter? That needs to be something that you think about before you purchase your camera. And whenever it comes to features, you also want to think about what you'll be using the most. Does it have a flip-out LCD screen? Some do and some don't. I've used both before, and the flip-out LCD screen is a must-have, especially if you're doing any sort of vlogging or needing to look at yourself in the lens. Does it have a hot shoe mount? Is it designed to be able to pick up and start shooting, or does it need a bunch of other accessories to film with? These are things that you need to take into consideration and determine if it's important or not for you with what you'll be filming. Number 6 is film settings. This is something that many people tend to forget about or skip over, but is very important. Since many DSLRs are mainly picture cameras that have a really good video option, many of them don't have some of the settings that a typical film camera would. This is because they are first a picture camera and then second a cinema camera. These settings would be focus peaking, histograms, zebra, false color, and things like that. You would definitely see these settings inside of a typical video camera like a Canon C100, but many of the older DSLRs don't have that. If you're gonna be mostly filming, you definitely want these settings inside of your camera to help. Of course, if your camera doesn't have it, that doesn't mean it's a deal breaker, but just something to be aware of, and it's something to look for. Some older cameras even have the ability to load third-party software that unlocks those features. Magic Lantern, for example, was super popular when DSLR started to be used for filmmaking because it allowed you to take a camera like a Canon T2i, which had virtually no video settings, and unlock those settings with a free third-party software. So as you're looking into a camera, check and see what film settings it has and if it will work for you. Number 7 is autofocus. Now, this is one where you will start to get really controversial, and to be honest, autofocus has only started to become popular in the last 3 to 4 years. Autofocus used to be so bad that nobody ever used it, but now autofocus has been improving so much that I know some people that never shoot manual focus. Canon has some of the best autofocus on the market today, hands down. Nothing has ever come close to beating Canon's dual pixel autofocus. So if autofocus is something that you'd really use, then I would definitely pay a little bit extra money to make sure that my camera has the dual pixel autofocus. Canon has great autofocus, while something like a Panasonic doesn't have nearly as good autofocus. So if your camera doesn't have good autofocus, then just use manual focus like we've been doing since the beginning of filmmaking. And to be honest, I'm sure that if I used autofocus all the time, I would say that it was a necessity, but since I don't really use it that often, it's not that big of a deal to me. A few of my friends who have been using Canon cameras from the beginning would probably say the opposite because they have been using autofocus 100% since they started filming, and all of their shots are in focus because of that. So I can't really tell you that if the camera you're looking at has bad autofocus not to get it, because I today don't really use autofocus that much. But if that's something that you want and something that you think you will need, definitely pay attention and maybe spend a little bit more money to get a camera with great autofocus. Number 8 is battery life. How long do the batteries last in your camera, and is that going to be an issue for you? Do you shoot a lot of concerts or corporate videos? A long-lasting battery might be a necessity for you. Whatever camera you're looking at, try to find out how long the battery lasts. Some official websites will tell you how long the battery typically lasts, but if not, just search online and there are usually forums and information about the batteries. My old Canon 7D had a battery life of about an hour and a half. My GH5S will last about 2.5 hours. While something like the Canon C100 has a battery life of 11 hours. So figuring out the battery life of the camera can actually help determine if it's the camera you need for what you shoot. If you don't film long events, definitely just get a bunch of extra batteries to have with you, but if you do film events, something like the Canon 7D is going to be horrible for you because you'll constantly be switching batteries, and something like the C100 might be a better option for you. Number 9 is the camera company. Now, why does knowing about the company determine if you buy a camera or not? Well, the reason I make this point is because there have been some companies that filmmakers have invested all of their equipment and money into, only to find out that the company has decided that it's not really going to improve the video side much more. Then when filmmakers want to upgrade, they have to sell everything and start over with a new company because the original one isn't going anywhere with video. For example, the biggest debate for a really long time was Canon versus Nikon with video. That's what everybody was talking about. Some invested into Canon, some invested into Nikon, and since then Canon has come out with an entire video camera line which shows how dedicated they are to filmmakers, while Nikon on the other hand is just slowly upgrading their DSLRs. They also said that video wasn't really going to be their focus, but that their focus is going to be more towards photography. So everyone who invested in Nikon could only go up so high before they had to move to a completely different camera brand. So look up the camera brand you're considering, and do they value video? Do they value what you need, or is it just some option that they've thrown into their camera because everybody else is as well? Again, do you want Canon or Nikon? Well, look more into Nikon and see if they value video. And I'm not saying that Nikon doesn't have great video options or that their newer cameras don't shoot good quality video. I'm just saying that there is not one professional filmmaker I know that shoots video on a Nikon. They use a company that values what they need, and that is video. And finally, the very last point I want to make, and that of course is price. Out of all the things we talked about, I'm sure that this is probably going to determine whether you're going to get your camera or not. But at the same time, the most expensive camera doesn't mean that it checks all the boxes that you specifically need. If you have multiple cameras that you're looking at in your budget, it doesn't mean that you have to buy the most expensive one and it checks all the boxes. It could be that the least expensive one checks all the boxes that you specifically need. So for example, let's take some cameras and stack them up to the list and see how they do. The Canon T2i is a pretty old camera and came out in 2008. It has interchangeable lenses and manual controls, but only shoots in 24 frames per second, no 4K, plastic build, no film settings, no autofocus, and terrible battery. But it's only $150 used on eBay. So looking at this camera, it pretty much sucks with everything except a perfect starter camera. If you're thinking about getting into filmmaking but only have $150, this is a great camera to start with, but only for those wanting to dabble in filmmaking. The Panasonic GH4 checks pretty much all boxes except autofocus and battery life. The Canon C100 is actually the opposite of checking every single box except resolution and frame rate. It has all the things you could ask for in a video camera, except it only shoots in 1080p and doesn't have good slow motion. If that's important to you, then this camera just won't work. So figure out what you shoot the most. Do you shoot weddings, commercials, corporate videos, skateboarding videos? Figure out what you shoot and then determine what you need. After that, determine your budget, find a camera in that budget and see how many boxes it checks. There are some things that are a necessity, but some things that you might be okay not having, like autofocus. Determine your budget, find the camera that you're looking for in that budget, and then see how many boxes are checked and go from there. Another thing you can do is to rent the camera for a weekend. If you're looking at a $1,500 camera, rent it for 3 days for $150 and try it out to see if it's exactly what you want. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this episode and feel a lot more confident when doing some camera shopping. If you'd like to learn even more about how to run your camera and get cinematic footage, you can check out our website over at tomorrowsfilmmakers.com and start learning with whatever camera you have, from a smartphone to a RED camera. We have over 1,000 training videos and over 100 hours of content on every single filmmaking subject that you can imagine. If you want to go into the production side with weddings, real estate, music videos, commercials, we teach all about that. And if you want to go more into the narrative side with directing, storyboarding, acting, we teach all of those as well. If you'd like to join over 10,000 other filmmakers just like you pursuing their dreams to learn all about film, click the link below and sign up for our full academy for 90% off. Our award-winning $800 online film course for a limited time is only $97. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video. Be sure to click the link in the description below and head on over to tomorrowsfilmmakers.com to learn all the skills that you need to succeed.